So now we've got the business processes and the software tools wrapped around the InChest. I'm going to ask Graham from Omnion to talk about some of the hardware infrastructure and the file handling tools that Omnion can offer to help you underpin all this. Graham.
Thank you, Granby. So we heard Tom and Serena talking a little bit about the management and the metadata around these workflows and these systems. But of course, we mustn't forget that there's real video and audio assets that we're trying to manage here. And we need somewhere to store those, we need somewhere to ingest them to. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the choices that we need to make when choosing a server platform and some of the ways that we can do that. First, I'm going to talk about format decisions. There are a whole load of video formats out there and not quite so many audio formats out there. I'm sure you all know of some, if not all of them, maybe more than I do. And I'm sure some of you have got your favourites out there. And many of you will know that they've all got good and bad points. So how do you actually choose from these myriad of formats? How do you actually pick one, put your money on that as the one to use for your workflow? It's not quite as easy as it sounds. I've come up with 4 key points that may help you decide. Firstly, interoperability with other components in the system. Is the format that you ingest to going to work with your editing systems? Is it going to work with your archive system? Is it going to work with your playout system? Secondly, latency. Latency is one of my favourite subjects at the moment. Latency is all about how fast you can get to that content as it's being ingested, how fast you can start using that file. Is it available for edit? Can I start picking that up in an editor and start editing on it? Can I start browsing it immediately? What's the latency between starting to record and starting to get those first frames and actually start using them for real production processes? For a sports workflow and for the sort of workflows that we're talking about here, low latency is going to be very important. We can't afford, say, on a cricket match to wait 9 hours until the end of the day before we start editing our highlights for something that's going to happen after the first over. We need to be able to start editing that first over before that break. Same with football for half time. Secondly, budget's going to be important. It may sound great to go for the highest bit rate possible. I'd certainly be happy selling a server that could work at 200 megabits per second. More megabits means more megabytes going onto disk. But more megabytes going onto disk also means more bandwidth on a network. If you've got to get that content back out again, if you've got to get that to editors to work on them, then you're going to need a big network infrastructure. Budgets for these systems may be constrained, and therefore you may have to compromise on your format in order to fit within that budget. Finally, source file formats may play a major part in this. If you're sourcing from a file-based capture device, maybe a Sony XD-Cam disc or some of the Panasonic devices, that may lead you to make a format decision to keep it the same. Keeping the same format throughout the whole workflow is often an advantage. Keeps things simpler to manage, negates the need for transcodes later on. Other processes may inevitably need other formats. You may not be able to work with your ingest format for all parts of your process. There may be some constraints, in which case you may be forced to transcode. Transcoding from as high as possibly good format that you can go for will lead to a better transcode down the line. Really, though, the aim is to ingest once and repurpose later. There are some systems out there, there are some workflows I've seen where multiple formats are ingested, an HD format, an SD format, all from the same source format. That's inevitably harder to manage, takes up more storage, it's going to end up being a more complex system. I try and avoid those sort of systems. So I mentioned HD, so why use HD for this multi-platform delivery? After all, it's a very low resolution device. What's the point in ingesting and going to that expensive HD in the first place? HD does cost more, it's typically higher bit rates, it's harder to encode, typically you need more storage and so on. So why bother going to that expense and that difficulty? Well, there have been some very comprehensive tests out there of taking HD sources and compressing them down, taking the same SD source and compressing it down. And actually the end result is visually a lot better if you go from the HD source. Basically and essentially, and I don't want to go through all the maths, and certainly I don't understand it all, but if you take more information in, you've got more to work with, and therefore you can get better information out again. So you get a better overall compression. Secondly, there's some production advantages, and they've been touched on in earlier parts of this presentation. Doing pan and scan on an HD clip, if you're going to output to a very small mobile device, having a wide shot, it may not be possible to see the ball being kicked, it may not be possible to see the players. So being able to pan and scan down to a small part of that HD picture will have advantages. And of course, the more information you've got, the more you can zoom in and the better quality result you end up with again.